All right, welcome everyone to the Wired for Wealth radio show, where you get access to world-class leaders that offer proven solutions for your life and for your money. My goal for you is for you to think better so you can do better, so you can feel better about your future. I'm your host, John MacGregor. But before we get into this extremely vital, important topic, just a quick reminder to ring that bell below and hit subscribe. You don't want to miss these important interviews. All right, folks, let's dive in. We are absolutely blessed and honored to have my friend Mark Wolff join us today. Mark Wolff is the owner of Senior Care Authority here in Sacramento, California. As a former financial advisor, long-term care insurance specialist, estate planning consultant, Mark's a certified senior advisor, a certified placement referral specialist, a certified dementia practitioner, and a chartered life underwriter. He is obviously one of the top people in his field, and that's why he's here today. Mark was a founding member and president of the National Placement Referral Alliance, whose charter is to advocate for seniors through influencing legislation and providing education, best practices, and a code of ethics for the senior placement industry. As a local business owner, Mark and his team works one-on-one with families, implementing a step-by-step educational process to help them make the best informed decisions for their loved ones. And I cannot commend him enough for the work he does. It's absolutely incredible. I really wanted Mark to come on this show because of the importance of what he does for seniors. And the reason this is extremely important for you and perhaps your parents and even grandparents is because in my experience working with thousands of individuals over the last 27 years, those families who have not planned this out and purchased some type of long-term care insurance or made plans for nursing care can be financially ruined when they have to pay for this. Because Medicare only covers you for a certain number of days, and after that, you're on your own. And I'll tell you, folks, it's expensive. I just looked it up. The average cost of a nursing home in California is $9,200 a month. And in Hawaii, where I'm from, it's over $15,000 per month. That's a lot of money. You can see why it just drains families' financial resources. And I've seen friends of mine, people I know, clients of mine who have gone bankrupt financially supporting their elder parents in nursing homes. And get these statistics. Someone turning age 65 today has almost a 70% chance of needing some type of long-term care service or support in the remaining years. Women need care longer. They need care for typically on average 3.7 years than men who are at 2.2 years. So think about that, $10,000 a month for almost 4 years. I mean, that's a lot of money. And 20% of people will need it for longer than 5 years. So that kind of sets the context for our conversation and why Mark is such an important guest for you and your family. So with that, I just want to welcome Mark. Good to see you.
Good to see you, John. Thanks for having me.
It's awesome to have you. This is such an important topic for anyone, whether you're a son, daughter, adult, or a senior, it does not matter. So Mark, why don't you just start telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, and also for the listeners who may not be schooled in what you do, how about a kind of a 30,000-foot snapshot of what you do and what options are out there for people? What people should be thinking about?
Okay, well, you did a pretty good job with the introduction. Covered a lot of ground there, but maybe the best thing to do is to tell you, how I got started. I think that'll answer a lot of questions. Because the funny thing is most people don't know that the industry that I'm in even exists. That they don't know that what I do is a thing, and so I didn't know it either. I'll tell you how I got started. It was about 2 decades ago. I was living in San Francisco. I was a financial advisor, and I was doing a lot of estate planning for people. I was doing a lot of long-term care planning, and I kind of fancied myself as sort of an expert on, showing people how to prepare for something that could happen out in the future, long-term care. And I was pretty good at showing people how to pay for something like that. And we're going to talk about this more, but there's a huge difference between being able to buy insurance that is going to pay for something way out in the future, because there's a lot of leverage there, and being 75, 85, 90 years old, and then having an event happen and then having to pay for it, or having your children pay for it. So, so what happened was, one day I got a call from my mom, and she told me that she had been to her neurologist. She had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's.
Wow.
And, it wasn't a big shock to me or my sister, because we'd seen the signs for a long time. We knew something was going on with mom. We knew she probably had dementia. But when you hear those words, it hits you like a ton of bricks.
Mm-hmm.
And so what ended up unfolding over the next decade was, I realized that, yeah, okay, I was probably an expert at how to pay for long-term care, but I knew nothing about the other really important stuff, which is, how do you make really difficult decisions for a loved one? Because now they have a lack of capacity, and now you're making decisions for your mom, who had been making decisions for you your whole life, right? And there's a lot of guilt that goes along with that. I didn't know things like, how do you know when is the right time to move mom out of her home where she's been for 30 years? Mm-hmm. I didn't know the difference between assisted living and memory care. I didn't know the different levels of care. What level of care did she need? And it was all up to me and my sister to figure that out. And I remember thinking, wouldn't it be great if there was a person who could help me, who I could run these questions by, who could tell me what questions to ask, who would tell me what to look for, to tell me what to expect, and sort of set that level of expectation for me. And I couldn't find anyone. But that was 20 years ago. Yeah. So fast forward many years, my family decided that we're going to move out of the Bay Area, move here to Placer County, Sacramento area. Yeah. And I was looking for something to do. We decided to leave the financial career behind and do something different. And then it struck me. It all came back to me, and I remembered how I remembered that would be something I would love to help people with. And lo and behold, there's an industry for that now. Mm-hmm. And so that's what got me to start Senior Care Authority in Sacramento. And so now what I do is I help families every day, help them with understanding the decisions that they have to make, helping them to understand the level of care for their loved ones. And my clients tend to fit into one of two categories. It's either somebody who's got Alzheimer's or dementia, and they're living with a spouse or living alone, and the adult children or a spouse starts thinking, I don't know if mom is really safe living alone anymore, or we don't know if dad is able to continue to care for her because she's not eating well anymore. Little signs, and we've got a little bit of time, and so I have a lot of clients where we're trying to understand the best jump off point in that process. So, the right timing to do things. The other clients that I have are more emergencies. These are people who might have had a stroke, something bad happened, they're in the hospital, they're in skilled nursing, and the family is told that mom or dad is going to be discharged on Wednesday, and you got to find a place for them to move, and they can't go home because you don't have the ability, either because you have your own children and you work every day and you can't care for mom because she's there and she needs someone to help, or you just don't have the equipment, you don't have the capability of really dealing with that kind of situation. So those are my clients.
Yeah, no, it's amazing the work that you're doing, Mark, and helping so many families in this time of such confusion, right? I have an older brother who's in that kind of situation, and you've been very helpful in finding resources and services to help him. But it's very emotional because now, whether it's dementia or not, now you're telling your parent it's time to leave the house you've lived in for 30 years. And in my experience, there's always a lot of resistance around that, a lot of resistance around change, especially for someone who's elderly, right? And I do want to talk about the costs and all that other stuff. So what are some of the mistakes that families make in this situation?
Well, that's a good segue from what you were just saying, because people feel guilty. Adult children, that's one of the biggest problems that adult children have with their parents, is because the roles are reversed, right? This is their mom or dad. They're not used to telling mom or dad what to do, especially if it feels like it's against their will. If this is Alzheimer's or dementia, then the roles are truly reversed, and now the adult children really need to make a decision that's right for their mom or dad.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's sometimes it feels like tough love. It feels like, when mom or dad told you to do something and you didn't want to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's getting over that guilt and realizing that you're doing what has to be done, and you're making decisions with your brain and your heart. That's one of the biggest obstacles that my clients have to overcome.
What's the typical client? And when you say client, are you talking about the younger siblings, or are you talking about the actual person going into the nursing home? Who is your client?
It depends on the situation. When we were talking about senior care, and that's what I kind of talk about, we talk about there are independent living facilities where somebody who may be living in retirement, they're growing older, they're mowing that lawn, they're preparing all their meals, they're doing all the things that you do, and they're just they don't want all that responsibility anymore. Maybe they're losing a lot of their friends, and so they're getting more lonely. And so the idea of being in a place, an independent living place, where there's other people their age who are doing lots of activities all the time, where they have a dining room, a nice dining room with culinary prepared meals, so you don't have to cook all your meals anymore. You can pick and choose. So that's one thing we talk about. There's assisted living, where you get everything I just mentioned, plus they have caregivers who help everything from managing your medication to standing by in the shower if you're a little wobbly, make sure you don't fall. Every all along the spectrum of providing care in a caregiving environment. And then there's memory care for people that have Alzheimer's and dementia, and they're pretty far along the spectrum, and they need to be in an environment that specializes in helping them with their cognitive issues.
So what you're saying is there's a spectrum of services based on what level of care you need, from semi-independent to fully dependent and all in between.
Yeah, it's a different conversation and I'm forgetting the question, to be honest with you.
No, it's just, there's a spectrum of services for people, right? There's some facilities that are semi-independent, some facilities that are fully dependent, and then all in between, right? And then different medical issues also have different facilities as well.
Yeah, I mean, what I remember back when I was a kid and my grandma had Alzheimer's, and my mom used to fly to Michigan to visit with her, and she would visit her in the convalescent hospital.
Yeah.
And convalescent hospital was bad, right? It was scary, and nobody said good things about that sort of place. But back then, that's the only thing that really existed for people who needed any kind of care. And the world has changed a lot in this country when it comes to caregiving. And you can live in a very nice accommodation where it feels like you're on vacation, and be receiving wonderful care. And if you really need memory care, then there's places that provide memory care, but they're not the scary convalescent hospitals of the past.
Yeah. I've seen some of these facilities. Some of these communities are amazing. I mean, the activities and the food and the golf, and everyone's driving around in a golf cart. I mean, it's just, I'm thinking to myself, wow, this looks pretty cool. How do I get in there? But yeah, What about the in-home services for those that don't leave their home?
Well, every conversation that I have with a new, oh yeah, you asked me who's my client, or the adult children, or the actual person that
I think I miscommunicated my question, but
right, but generally I'm working with the adult children or the spouse of the
okay,
person who really needs care. That's usually who I'm working with.
got it. What's the age of that person that you're typically working with, and then what's the age of the parent? What's the general guidelines on that?
The parents are usually between 75 and 90.
Yep.
And the adult children are usually in their mid 50s, mid 60s. And
Okay.
oftentimes I also will work with a spouse who's 75 or 80, and she's their caregiver for her husband.
Right.
Age.
Well, that leads me to my question then. So you're 45, 50, 55 years old, right? You've got parents that are 75 plus. What should they be doing now in order to prepare for this? It's really inevitable, right? That they're going to need, majority of people are going to need, we talked about 70% of people are going to need nursing facility care. What should they be doing now so it's not some mad scramble when something serious happens? And then part two to that question is, how do those children have that conversation with their older parents, saying, hey, here's the statistics, here's what may happen, you've got some health issues, we should really start thinking about this, and what's our next step in case you do need that?
Well, the first question you asked is what can you do now to prepare?
Yeah.
And the one thing is I just have to say, I hope every time I talk to a new client that their mom or dad had purchased some kind of insurance product years ago. Mm-hmm. Because I've never, not one time ever looked at a long-term care policy and said, this was kind of a waste of money. It has every single time been a blessing, makes a huge difference. So look, the answer to the question really depends on the person, the parents, what's their financial situation like. I've had people who've invested well, who have significant nest eggs, who have lots of equity in their homes. It gets more complicated when it's a husband and wife living together, because it's hard to liquidate certain assets because the other person's still going to be using them, right? So that just gets more complicated. But just to keep a simple case, if you've got an individual who's widower, and they have a lot of equity in their home's worth $700,000, conceivably, you have $700,000 of liquidity that you could create to pay for long-term care. And so, that's a great situation. But you could probably imagine I have just as many conversations with people who don't have those assets. All they have is Social Security. And so, again, we're talking about a big range of outcomes depending on the financial situation of the person. I have a lot of conversations with friends. I went for a walk with my buddy Andre recently, and he said, "Hey, Mark, what do adult children like me, who I've been working my whole life, I'm hoping to retire in the next, say, 5 years.
Yeah.
And we've got just enough money to we've planned it out, so we're going to live real comfortable and we're going to be able to travel. But my parents aren't in that situation. They may need long-term care, and I'm looking at what it costs for long-term care. What do kids like me, adult children, what do we do in a situation like this? How do we ever say, I'm going to retire in 5 years? Because if that happens, if they move in with us, I may be working for another 10 or 15 years.
Yeah. I think that's really the heart of this episode. That's really the heart of this show is, what do those young adults do? And because it's a life changer. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen it on both sides, Mark. I've seen those individuals that don't have the long-term care insurance and they're financially devastated. And then I see the ones that did have that long-term care insurance. And it's such a feeling of freedom and peace for those that planned ahead. When I run into people and they say, "Hey, John, what kind of insurance do I need? Do I need, life insurance and that kind of stuff?" And depends on the situation, of course. A lot of times they do, because they're the sole breadwinner, and they've got younger sibling or younger children, and so they want to make sure they're taken care of in case they pass away. But a lot of people are holding on to these loaded life insurance policies with a small cash value, and they're still pouring money into it. And their kids are already grown out of the house, and they don't really need it anymore. And I always, if they're over 40 or 45 years old, I'm telling them they need to start looking at long-term care insurance now, because the sooner you get it, the cheaper it is. And so it is so much more likely you're going to need it. And so my advice and my experience of doing this for many years, the sooner you get life insurance, the better off you and your family are going to be. And when I was offering long-term care insurance, that was a piece of what I did many years ago. They were more basic plans than they are today. I mean, the plans today are very exotic, all kinds of bells and whistles, a lot of return in premium if you don't use it. So highly, highly encouraged. And just on that topic, Mark, where would people go? Where should people go to get a fair and honest quote and get good support and guidance on a good long-term care policy? What would you recommend?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that sort of continuation of what you were just saying, because I was also selling life insurance not that long ago. I was a wholesaler representing many companies. Yeah. And one interesting thing is, if you still have your health, if you've had a life insurance policy for a long time and you're 45 or even 55 years old and you're still relatively healthy, you can exchange your policy if it has cash value in it for a new policy. It has a long-term care rider on it. And what's really neat about that is let's say it's a $500,000 policy. A lot of times the long-term care benefit is equal to the death benefit. Wow. So if triggering that benefit would be just like triggering a long-term care policy. And now you take a percentage of your death benefit every month, just like you would receive a benefit from your long-term care. So, and the neat thing about that scenario is, even if you're one of the 30% using your figures that doesn't ever need long-term care, well, we're all going to need our life insurance someday. Yeah. And so one way or another, your premiums are not going to go to waste. They'll either go to support your long-term care need, or they'll go to your family, your estate. Wow, that's terrific advice. What a gold nugget there. Thank you. That's great, Mark. Really good. And I found that most financial advisors who I know today offer insurance. Yeah. And many of those life insurance carriers have long-term care riders. Sure. So it's not hard to find. Yeah. And it's very popular. And when I was still in the business and just sort of exiting that business, it seemed to me like life insurance with those riders were replacing traditional long-term care insurance. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I've seen as well, more recently. Yeah. So what happens, Mark, if there's no money? What happens in that situation when the person needs that type of care and there's no kids, there's no money, what have you? What's the option there? And unfortunately, I have that conversation all the time. Yeah, I bet. It's a hard conversation to have. But I feel like I have to be straight with people, because they have a really hard time getting a straight answer from anybody out there with those type. And it's usually when there's a crisis happening. You mentioned skilled nursing a few times, or nursing homes you mentioned. Yeah. I think a lot of people make that mistake of saying nursing home, because a nursing home is a real specific type of a place. What I've been talking about since we started talking are assisted living communities. Okay. And at least in California, assisted living communities are private pay. And we could talk about what those cost, but if somebody doesn't have any money, and everyone's heard of Medicare, everyone's heard of Medi-Cal, I get a lot of calls saying, hey, my mom needs assisted living. She's got Social Security and she's qualified for Medi-Cal. Can you help us find a place? And I have to explain what that means. Medi-Cal is a government system that only pays for a stay in a skilled nursing facility. The skilled nursing facility, also known as a rehab facility, is where you go when you've been in the hospital because you had a stroke or something else happened. And then you need to go somewhere to stabilize. Medicare pays for 20 days of your rehab in a skilled nursing facility.
Mhm.
And then, well, it could pay up to 100 days if you have a Medicare Advantage plan that, that'll take care of that. But so generally we're looking at, right around 3 weeks of rehab, and then you have to move out because it becomes very expensive. The $9,000, $15,000 in Hawaii that you mentioned in your introduction, those are skilled nursing facilities. They are very expensive if you have to pay for them out of your pocket.
Mm-hmm.
So most people, the choice is move out, get discharged from there, go into assisted living. In California, we're talking about somewhere between $4,000 and $7,000 a month, depending on your needs and depending on where you go. But if you can't afford that, there are benefits if you're a veteran who served during specific dates at time of war. There's a veterans benefit that'll pay up to a couple $1,000s a month. And then there's Medi-Cal. And again, with Medi-Cal, you have to be in a skilled nursing facility, which it's like being in a hospital. It's not a good place to live long term.
Yeah. Wow, that's almost sobering, right? I mean, to think of all of this stuff that our seniors are facing, and also the kids. But that's why you're here, and that's the beautiful work you do. Mark, if you were to encapsulate, I know we've touched on a lot of this stuff, but if you were to encapsulate common advice that you give your clients, what would that be in a nutshell?
Okay, I think that probably the advice that I give more than anything is I have conversations like the one we've been talking about, adult children.
Yeah.
They don't know what to do. And a lot of times, and I have really close friends who they don't spend any time with their family anymore. They're never home for dinner. They're always with their mom or dads over at their house because they're so needy. And it's become a really difficult situation.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of these conversations with people. How do I deal with this? Do I dig into my own retirement savings to pay for it? What about my children? How do I convince my mom or dad to get the care that they need because they refuse to do it? All these different things.
Yeah.
And what I tell them is, you and me, when we make big financial decisions, we do it with 20 years of vision. We're thinking about, this is a house. So if we're going to buy a house, this is a house I'm going to live in for the next 15 or 20 years. I'm going to raise my kids here. It's in a good school district.
Yeah.
I like the proximity to the freeway and all that, right?
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with an elderly loved one who's not in the best health, their health is going to be changing. And so my advice to those people is, don't think in that long-term mentality. Solve the problem at hand because you have no choice. You have to do that.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes you can solve that problem in a less expensive way.
Yeah.
And just know that things are going to change. And then you're going to have to solve the next problem and then solve the next problem. And it's really hard to see the forest through the trees, but you just have to realize that that's the best way to handle that. And it gives you a different way of looking at it. With my mom, with her Alzheimer's, I was really frustrated because I'm one of those people who has to solve every problem. And then when I realized I can't solve this problem, that gave me the freedom to breathe.
Makes a lot of sense. Interesting. That's great, Mark. So if you were to define your ideal client, who would that be?
Well, the clients who I like working with the most are clients with just family that care.
Yeah.
If your mom or dad has Alzheimer's, or they're in the hospital, I like working with people who are their advocate. If I'm talking to an adult daughter who can tell me all about her mom's history, what
Yeah.
mom likes, what she doesn't like,
Yeah.
and the family, if they're going to come up a little bit short on what it would cost to get the best care, the family's willing to cobble together a little bit more to
Yeah.
make it happen. I love working with families who take responsibility. They're the power of attorney. They care. They're going to do whatever it takes to make sure that mom, gets the care that she needs. Those are
Mhm.
my favorite kind of clients.
Terrific. If you mind me asking, how do you get paid for what you do?
Well, I've never charged a family anything.
Huh.
Customarily in my industry, the facility pays a referral fee. So I get
I
paid a
see.
referral fee.
I see.
So
Oh, okay.
I can pay I can do some consulting with a family here and there if they want me to do
Mhm.
something different, but generally that's not what I do.
Wow. Terrific. Final thoughts, Mark, as we wrap up. What are your final thoughts to someone listening to this, whether it's an aging person or those young adult children? What are your final thoughts?
Well, I think that the one message I'd really like to get through to people is when most people don't like to think about what I do,
Mhm.
understandably.
Yeah.
But when you do find yourself in a situation, and it's usually a crisis,
Yeah.
people are conditioned to go online and find solutions there. We live in a DIY society culture now.
Yeah.
I'm guilty. I use Amazon for everything.
Yeah.
But that's what people think when they get the news from the doctor that mom should receive 24-hour care, right? And
Yeah.
so people go online, and I just want to express as deeply as I can that be careful,
Yeah.
because you think there's a lot of information out there on the internet, and there is, but it's not information that's going to help you make the right decision.
Yeah.
And we live in my industry is completely unregulated. Not completely, but 95% unregulated.
Huh.
And so there's a lot of stuff that goes on out there that's not what I consider consumer protection.
Hmm.
And I just I think that you'd mentioned earlier that I'm a co-founder of a charitable organization
Mhm.
whose purpose it is to advocate for seniors, and people who do what I do are members of that organization. And so if you're in California or Arizona or Texas or wherever, and you need to find someone that can help, I highly suggest that you go to their website.
Mhm.
And the website is npralliance.org. It's for the National Placement Referral Alliance, npralliance.org, and they can find someone who has a code of ethics out there.
Yeah, we'll make sure we'll put that in the chat box. Speaking of that, how do people find you?
You can call me, 916-573-2120.
Terrific, terrific. We'll make sure we put that in the chat box as well. Mark, I can't tell you how I think this is one of the most powerful and impactful episodes we've done. And I mean, it's just loaded with golden nuggets. And I'm not just saying that to be kind. I've seen this firsthand with my clients, what they've gone through, those that planned and those that didn't. And it's a nightmare on one hand, and it's a blessing on the other. And this subject needs to be talked about more because, as we said earlier, it's affecting 70% of families, and it can financially devastate families and fortunes. and emotionally devastate people. And that's why I think what you're doing is just so awesome. I hope we can continue this dialogue, and I hope we can, we can bring you back on again to kind of remind people of how important this is. So really appreciate it, Mark.
I'd love to come back anytime. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, guys, thank you so much. Again, don't forget to hit subscribe, ring that bell, and leave a comment or a question, or if you have something to ask Mark, don't hesitate to put it in the chat. And he'll make sure to get you that answer. Don't forget, I got a lot of free downloads on my website that you can download immediately right now to start your journey to financial freedom and peace of mind. With that, we'll see you next time. Upward and onward. Take care.